Imagine this. It's Monday morning, 6:45 a.m. You're sitting in your car on the highway, stuck in bumper-to-bumper traffic, the same highway you drive every weekday. Your coffee is in the cup holder and you're listening to a podcast while trying to convince yourself that this commute isn't that bad. 35 minutes each way, it could be worse, right? Some people drive an hour. You switch to the left lane, then back to the right, maybe moving 25 kilometers per hour. And your brain does that thing where it calculates how much longer until you get to the office. If traffic doesn't clear, another 20 minutes, maybe 25. You'll arrive at 7:30 a.m. You'll sit at your desk until 5 p.m. Then you'll do it all in reverse. What you don't realize while sitting there is this: you're not just commuting to work. You're working for free. 35 minutes each way, 70 minutes total per day, unpaid labor that your employer has convinced you doesn't count. They take those hours, they take the stress, they take your gas money and car maintenance and vehicle wear, and they pay you exactly $0 for it. You think you're making $60,000 a year working 40 hours a week. But when you do the real math, when you factor in the true cost and time of that commute, you're actually closer to making $45,000. That commute stole a raise you never received. I'm Wyatt and I spend way too much time obsessing over the hidden costs that drain people's bank accounts while their attention is elsewhere. If you've ever looked at your paycheck and thought this should feel like more money, or if you can't figure out why you're so drained by Friday even though you only worked 8-hour days, hit that subscribe button and give the video a thumbs up if this helps. Most people completely miss a fundamental thing about commuting. We've been conditioned to think of commute time as this neutral dead zone between our personal life and work life. It doesn't count as work because you're not at the office yet, and it doesn't count as personal time because you're literally on your way to work. So it exists in this weird limbo that nobody thinks about. But this limbo is exactly where you're being robbed. Let me introduce you to Layla. She's 32 and works as an accountant at a mid-sized company making $65,000 a year. After taxes, that's about $48,000 take-home, or roughly $4,000 a month. Her job is in the city center and she lives where she can actually afford rent in the suburbs, which means a 30-minute commute if she leaves at 6:30 a.m. In the evening, the rush hour traffic is worse, so it takes 45 minutes to get home. She does this 5 days a week, 50 weeks a year because she has 2 weeks of vacation. Layla thinks her work schedule looks like this: in the office from 7:30 a.m. to 5 p.m., with a 1-hour lunch break. That's 8.5 hours in the office, 8 hours of actual work, 40 hours a week. A full-time employee making $65,000 for 40 hours a week, that's $31.25 per hour. Sounds nice. But when we look at Layla's real schedule, the one that includes all the time her job actually consumes. She wakes up at 5:45 a.m. to shower and get ready for work, 30 minutes of grooming labor that only exists because of her job. She's not doing it for fun, she's doing it because her employer requires her to look presentable. Then she gets in the car at 6:30 a.m. and drives for 30 minutes. She sits at her desk from 7:30 a.m. to 5 p.m. Then she drives 45 minutes home and arrives at 5:45 p.m. Then another 30 minutes to decompress, change out of work clothes, tell her partner about her day, check emails she couldn't get to, and mentally transition from work mode to home mode. Add it all up, this means 12 hours and 15 minutes of Layla's day are consumed by her job. 12 hours and she only gets paid for 8 of them. Let me show you what this does to her real hourly wage because the math is brutal. Layla makes $65,000 a year and takes home $48,000 after federal taxes, state taxes, and FICA. That's her real income. Now divide that by her real working hours. 50 weeks times 5 days times 12.25 hours per day equals 3,062 hours per year. $48,000 divided by 3,062 equals $15.67 per hour. She thought she was making $31.25. The commute cut her wage in half. But we're not done yet because commuting doesn't just steal time, it costs money too. Layla drives a Honda. It's fairly fuel efficient and her 30-minute commute each way is about 40 kilometers per day. That's 200 kilometers per week, 10,000 kilometers per year just for commuting. Using the IRS 2026 standard mileage rate of 67 cents per kilometer, which is actually based on the real cost of operating a vehicle including maintenance, insurance, and depreciation, 10,000 kilometers times $0. 67 means Layla is spending $6,700 a year just to get to work. Now her $48,000 take-home pay is really $41,300. Divided by 3,062 hours, her true hourly wage drops to $13.49. For a job advertised as $65,000 a year. The commute didn't just cost her a raise, it cut her salary in half. And because nobody ever does this math, she doesn't even realize it. I can already hear what you're thinking. Everyone has to get to work somehow. You can't just complain about commuting. It's part of having a job. And yes, of course, in the current system most people commute. But that doesn't mean the system makes sense. And it definitely doesn't mean you have to accept it without understanding what you're actually paying for. Employers know exactly what they're doing. They know you're bearing the cost of commuting. And they built their entire employment model on the assumption that you'll accept these costs without questioning them. Think about it. Did anyone in the job interview ask how far you live from the office? Did they offer compensation for your commute? Did they account for the extra hours it would take you to get there? No. They made you an offer based on a 40-hour workweek as if you could just teleport to the office and back. Meanwhile, they're taking way more than 40 hours out of your life. They take your commute time you could have used to learn a skill, start a side hustle, or sleep. They take your commute money you could have invested. They take your mental energy, which you spend in traffic instead of with your family. And they pay you as if none of it matters. Let me show you what this looks like over an entire career because the numbers are truly horrifying. Layla started this job at 25. So she's been doing it for 7 years now. 7 years of 30 minutes in the morning and 45 minutes in the evening. That's 625 hours per year spent in the car. Over 7 years, that's 4,375 hours. Divided by 24, that's 182 days. Layla has spent half a year of her life in traffic for a job she could theoretically do from home 3 days a week. But her boss is old school and wants everyone in the office. On the money side, $6,700 per year in vehicle costs times 7 years equals $46,900 Layla has spent just to get to work. If she had invested that money instead at 8% annual return, she would have over $55,000 right now. $55,000 that could be compounding for her. Instead, she has a car with 43,000 extra kilometers on it and a vague feeling that something isn't right. This is commuting fraud in its purest form. Your job is supposed to pay a certain amount. You're supposed to work a certain number of hours. But the real numbers paint a completely different picture. The real numbers show you're working way more hours and getting paid way less money than you thought. And all that extra time and money goes straight to your employer without them paying you a single cent for it. Now let's talk about what this does to your life beyond money because the financial damage is only part of the harm. Layla leaves home at 6:30 a.m. and gets back at 5:45 p.m. That means 11 hours and 15 minutes of every weekday is consumed by her job. She has maybe 4 hours left to do everything before going to bed. Cook dinner, exercise, spend time with her partner, do laundry, run errands, and if she's lucky, watch one episode of a show. Her entire life is squeezed into 4 hours a day, 5 days a week. She's exhausted on weekends. She's been waking up at 5:45 all week, sitting in traffic, dealing with office politics, deadlines, and meetings that could have been emails. So by Saturday morning she doesn't want to do anything productive. She just wants to recover. So she sleeps in, scrolls on her phone, and does the shopping she couldn't do during the week because things were closed by the time she got home from work. On Sunday she's already dreading Monday. The cycle begins again. When you add it all up, think about what the commute is really costing you. Your energy, your time with people you love, your ability to have hobbies or side projects or any life outside of work. You're spending 12 hours a day on a job you're only paid for 8. And those 4 unpaid hours are among the worst hours. You're not spending that time doing something fun. You're sitting in a metal box on the highway breathing exhaust fumes and staring at brake lights. There's also a health cost nobody talks about, and the research on this is genuinely disturbing. A study from the University of Montreal found that people with commutes longer than 20 minutes have higher blood pressure, higher stress levels, and lower overall life satisfaction. Another study from the UK found that every additional minute of commuting reduces job satisfaction and mental health in measurable ways. You're literally getting sick for free, and your employer gets a stressed, tired, and unhealthy version of you without paying any compensation. Now I want to talk about the real Layla, the real person I know who understood this and did something about it. She was exactly in this situation. 30-minute commute each way, making $68,000 a year, and she thought she had a pretty good setup. Then one day she calculated what her commute was really costing her: time, money, stress, health impact, everything. She realized she was actually making about $15 an hour. So she went to her boss and asked if she could work from home 3 days a week. She prepared a presentation showing her productivity wouldn't drop, she'd still be reachable during the same hours, and she'd come into the office for important meetings. Her boss said no. They wanted people in the office. It was about culture and collaboration, all the buzzwords managers use when they can't explain why they need to see you sitting at your desk. So she did the thing that changed everything. She started looking for another job. She found a fully remote position doing essentially the same work for $72,000 a year, $4,000 more, with zero commute. She took it. In the first year at her new remote job, everything changed in ways she didn't even anticipate. She was no longer spending $4,000 a year on commuting, which meant she could save that money. She was no longer spending 10 hours a week in the car, which meant she got back 520 hours a year to use however she wanted. She used some of that time to start a side hustle doing freelance bookkeeping, which brought in an extra $12,000 that first year. So her effective income went from $64,000, old job $68,000 minus $4,000 commute cost, to $84,000, new job $72,000 plus $12,000 freelance. By eliminating her commute, she gave herself a $20,000 raise. $20,000. And she got 10 hours of her life back every week. 3 years later, she's making $95,000 at her main job plus $28,000 from freelance for a total of $123,000, almost double what she was making in the commuting job. All because she refused to accept that sitting in traffic was just part of having a career. I want you to understand this: for most people, at least for those watching this video, commuting is optional. Not always, of course. Some jobs genuinely require your physical presence, and if you're a nurse, construction worker, or retail employee, you can't do it from home. But if you have a desk job, if you spend your day on a computer, in meetings, and sending emails, that commute is a choice your employer is making. And that choice is pulling thousands of dollars and hundreds of hours out of your life every single year. Calculate your real hourly wage right now. Take your take-home pay after taxes, subtract your annual commuting costs, then divide by the total hours your job actually consumes, including commute time, getting ready, and decompressing afterward. What number do you get? Is it higher or lower than you thought? If it's lower, and it probably is, you need to decide whether that wage is worth it. Maybe it is. Maybe you love your job and the commute is worth it. But at least know what you're trading. At least make the decision with real information instead of the fairy tale your employer sold you about 40 hours and a certain salary. And if the numbers make you angry, good. Use that anger as fuel. Start looking for remote positions or hybrid roles where you only go to the office 2 days a week, or jobs closer to where you live. Commuting is not inevitable. It's a variable you can change. There's another option most people never even consider. Move closer to work. I know it sounds obvious, but hear me out, because when you actually do the math, it's often cheaper than you think. Let's say Layla's suburban rent is $1,500 a month and she could get an apartment in the city center near her office for $2,000 a month. That's $500 more a month, $6,000 more per year, which sounds expensive but changes when you factor in what she's already spending. Remember, she's spending $6,700 a year on commuting costs. If she lived in the city center, she could sell her car entirely. No more car payment, no insurance, no gas or maintenance. Let's say the car payment is $300 a month and insurance $150, that's $450 a month or $5,400 a year plus the $6,700 commuting cost. That means she's spending $12,100 a year to live in the suburbs and drive to work. If she moves and pays $6,000 more in rent but eliminates all car costs, she actually saves $6,100. Plus she gets back 10 hours a week. She can walk or bike or take a 10-minute train to work. Her life completely changes and she saves money while doing it. Most people never do this calculation. They see the higher rent and immediately think they can't afford it, but they're not factoring in all the costs. Think about your commute this way because framing matters. Every hour you spend in your car is an hour you could have been doing something else. You could have been working a side hustle, learning a skill that increases your income, sleeping, exercising, or being with your family. Even if you value your time at minimum wage, this commute is bleeding real money out of your life. And every dollar you spend on commuting is a dollar you can't invest. A dollar that isn't compounding. A dollar that isn't working for you while you sleep. Over a career that adds up to hundreds of thousands of dollars in lost wealth. The most insidious part of the commuting scam is how it normalizes wage theft. Because when you strip away the polite language, that's exactly what this is. Your employer is taking hours out of your life every week without paying you for them. In any other context, we would call this exactly what it is: theft. If your boss told you to come in 2 hours early every day and work for free, you'd laugh in their face. But when the same 2 hours are disguised as a commute, suddenly it becomes acceptable. Suddenly it becomes part of having a job.